The 2023 Netball World Cup will be the first Netball World Cup to take place in the African continent and is headed to Cape Town next week. This as Discovery has withdrawn Vitality as a title sponsor of the event. Events like this are often prone to ambush marketing, which is any attempt by a trader to connect itself with a sponsored event without actually paying sponsorship fees. South Africa has legislation in place to protect sponsors' rights. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Kelly Thompson from Adams & Adams. Kelly, appreciate your time this afternoon. Now, as a lawyer, how would you define ambush marketing and what are the potential legal implications of it?
So, Hugo, ambush marketing is really any attempt by a trader to associate themselves with a sponsored event when they're not, in fact, a sponsor. And this can be something where they're trying to make an obvious kind of association with the event by using, for example, the event logos in their advertising. Or it can be something a lot more subtle where they're kind of just trying to gain publicity from the event. So a classic example is Amstel handing out hats with Amstel logo on it, outside the European Championship. Obviously, spectators walking in grabbed a free hat, and as the camera panned onto the crowd, there. So
technically, you could be ambush marketing for Amstel right now.
I could be, if I had a beer in front of me.
Okay, interesting. So where are ethics and values in all of this? Do they fall away? Is it deliberate? I mean, what are the conversations potentially that advertising agencies are having with these ambushes, if we could call them, for a better description?
So I think there are some examples where it's unintentional. People get caught up in the spirit. I mean, if I think of the FIFA World Cup, a lot of local businesses wanted to sort of just show their support for our team, show their support for the fact that it was going on in South Africa, use the logos, not intentionally wanting to sort of ambush the event. But when you're talking big, major corporations, they know full well what the rights are. They know that the sponsors have paid millions of dollars in many cases to be the sponsors. And they want to just take advantage in a clever and creative way, get the attention of the public without paying the fees.
Now, we know that the Ministry of Industry and Trade has declared the 2023 Netball World Cup a protected event under Section 15A of the Merchandise Marks Act. How does this special protection actually work?
So that actually is kind of world-class legislation. I must just say that South Africa is one of the few countries that has specific legislation that prevents what we call ambush marketing by intrusion. So that's not where they're trying to create the impression that they're a sponsor, but it is kind of the example, the Amstel example that I gave, or Pepsi flying a hot air balloon over a Coca-Cola sponsored event. It's really where somebody's using their own trademark in a way that's aimed at getting some publicity from the event without paying any fees.
So all of this seems like very, very strategic that sponsors or competitors or anybody would use. I mean, you're talking about, hey guys, World Cup is happening. We put a logo there. Come and stay at come and eat at our restaurant or do whatever. But I've also seen where you go into a stadium, could be a football stadium, for instance, and a row of 50 individuals suddenly get up and they flash a logo or an advert of sorts. What about those individuals? Where does that all factor in?
Right, so that would be ambush marketing by intrusion. And if it's been declared a protected event, certainly in South Africa, then that is a criminal offence. And potentially those individuals could be prosecuted for ambush marketing under Section 15A of the Merchandise Marks Act. So it is very serious, and you need to be very careful about what you do. Obviously, those individuals very often have just been paid a small amount to kind of go into the stadium, but they could land up in very hot water.
So I'm going to take you back a little bit to the issue around the ethics and the potential conversation that is had by a brand and the individuals that go out. These companies, I'd imagine, are throwing ethics right out the door and have no care for them. Is it in part because there is no legislation wherever they're doing it? And then when we talk about legislation that we have in South Africa, which you have said is world-class, what are the potential penalties?
So, as I said, they could be prosecuted criminally, which is obviously a very serious offence. But I think a lot of the conversations maybe are happening at the level of, let's be a little bit creative, let's sail as close to the wind as we possibly can, we want to get some publicity, we're not a sponsor of this event, let's see what we can get away with. And, it could be something very quick that is maybe flighted on a Friday night, pulled by the Saturday morning, but already the damage is done, potentially from the sponsor's perspective. So I think there is an ethical conversation to be had because without the sponsors being protected, we're actually at risk of not having these events. Certainly in South Africa or other countries as well, need to, as part of their bidding process, say, we have this legislation in place, we will take action if ambush marketing occurs.
So can you give us illustrations of, in other countries, where ambush marketing has taken place by intrusion or otherwise, and the companies or individuals have been prosecuted?
So sometimes there's other legislation in place that might make it possible to take action. For example, just trademark infringement. If you use somebody's registered trademark, it's trademark infringement. There can be unlawful competition laws in place. And a lot of the countries have taken the view that their existing legislation is sufficient. They don't need to go that extra step to protect against ambush marketing. So generally, action can be taken, depending on the nature of the sort of ambush, as it were, under sort of general legislation.
Now, as a lawyer, what advice would you give to businesses and marketers to avoid engaging in ambush marketing? Because sometimes it's a really good deal, I'd imagine. Because I mean, you talk about, I know obviously of two brands that were competing, two vehicle brands, right? One brand did an ethical bit of advertising on the Friday night ahead of a long public holiday, and then pulled it the day before the public holidays, before the holiday ended. So even if you do go out, the damage has already been done, so to speak.
So, I mean, the advice I'd give to certain local businesses is, try not, obviously don't use the logos of the event. You can by all means get caught up in the spirit of it, have a general netball advertisement, or wish good luck to our national team without actually ambushing the event, using logos that you shouldn't, or creating some sort of association or impression that you're a sponsor. So I think there are things that you can do to still take part in the spirit of the event without actually crossing the line and landing in hot water.
Well, it all seems pretty obvious when you're out at the stadium and you're watching all the ladies play netball. But that's not the only place where intrusion or ambush marketing can occur. There's also a lot that can happen on social media too, is there not? Absolutely.
Social media, and that's quite difficult to police, quite difficult to take action against that. A lot of the social media platforms have got takedown procedures for if somebody's trademark is being used or copyright in a logo or some sort of emblem relating to the event. But it will be a lot more difficult to kind of use the ambush marketing legislation in those spaces, because then there are questions about where is it taking place. If an overseas company is doing it, is that taking place here or there or somewhere in cyberspace?
So what we're definitely aware of or sure of is that there is legislation to protect the sponsors. But let's talk about the administrative aspect to it, right? Do we have the mechanics been put in place to ensure that if ambush marketing by intrusion occurs at the opening ceremony, that those people will be brought to book?
So generally, the organizers of the events, and I mean, this was famously done during the FIFA World Cup, where they were very stringent and accused of being a little bit heavy-handed. Generally, they will check people going into the stadium to make sure that they don't have branded items or aren't trying to commit some sort of ambush marketing. And generally, the police will also be on standby to take action if there is an example of that taking place.
So this is exactly what's happening in South Africa, that if I and 20 of my friends walked into any one of the stadia and flashed a particular brand, that we would be rounded up and taken away.
Definitely at risk of that. I'm not aware of exactly the steps they're taking for the Netball World Cup, but certainly for the FIFA World Cup, that could happen, and it did happen.
So how is Netball South Africa, and obviously the global body of netball, putting the necessary awareness out, outside obviously of conversations like this? Because I think a big part of it is it's okay to be able to arrest individuals, but it's certainly another issue around, well, the horse has already bolted, if you will. We're crying over spilt milk. How about preventing it? What sort of processes are being taken in order to put that in place?
So again, I'm not aware of any specifically for the Netball World Cup, but I know for the FIFA World Cup, they put out guidelines as to what people could and couldn't do. Obviously, they wrote letters. There was a lot of ambush marketing taking place in the lead-up to the event. Letters were written, generally a friendly one first, and then a more stringent, not so friendly one if people didn't comply. Some legal action was taken. A few companies were taken to court over it. So that is really the way in which to do it. But I agree, an awareness campaign is certainly something that would be of benefit.
And I suppose finally, it's also to talk about this World Cup being the first on the African continent. Does that in some way allow for greater possibility of ambush marketing? purely because we're not too familiar, certainly not with netball. I mean, as you say, you keep referring to FIFA because FIFA's one of the biggest sports brands. Netball, not quite as big.
Not as big, but I think by now businesses in South Africa at least should be aware of the pitfalls. The legislation actually was brought in 2003 for the Cricket World Cup at the time. So we've had a few events since then, rugby events and so on, which have also been declared protected events. So by now I think they should be cottoning on to the rules of the game.
And who's policing all of this to ensure that it, I mean, you've obviously got to be on the lookout to see, is it happening, is it not happening? Because if you aren't, then it could happen right under your nose and you're not actually aware of it.
Absolutely. It's up to the organisers of the event to really take care of their sponsors and look after their sponsors by taking action where there are these cases of ambush marketing.
Katie, appreciate your time and certainly giving us clarity on what would happen if I or you go ambush marketing at this World Cup.
Pleasure, Hugo. Thank you for having me.